The stars belonged to King Vorthak. Every single one of them. For 3,000 years, his ships had traveled between the stars, taking what they wanted. His empire stretched across 17 different star systems. Hundreds of worlds bowed down to him. Trillions of beings called him master. Commander Zixtal stood on the bridge of his warship watching another world surrender. The beings below were called Meridians. They had blue skin and 6 arms. Their cities were made of crystal that sang in the wind. Now those cities would serve the Empire. Another easy victory, said his second officer, Latorn Keshira. She pointed at the screens showing Meridian leaders walking out with white flags. They always give up when they see our ships, Zixtal nodded. It was always the same. The Empire would arrive. The locals would see the massive ships blocking out their sun. Then they would surrender. Smart ones did it quickly. Stupid ones tried to fight first, but they all surrendered in the end. The king's ships were not just weapons. They were symbols. Each one was the size of a small moon. Their hulls were made from black crystal that ate light. When 50 of them appeared in your sky, you knew resistance was pointless. But the ships were only part of the king's power. The real secret was the creature living inside him. It had no name that anyone knew. It looked like a mass of silver wires wrapped around his heart. The creature fed on life force. Every world that paid tribute to the king sent part of their people's life energy to feed the thing inside him. That was why King Vorthak never aged. That was why he had ruled for 3 millennia. As long as beings across the galaxy served him, the creature would keep him alive forever. Zixtal had served the Empire for 60 years. He had conquered 12 worlds. He had never questioned the system. Why would he? The strong ruled the weak. That was the way of the universe. His communication officer looked up from her station. Commander, we have new orders. Zixtal walked over to read them. A new target, a small system with only one inhabited world. The locals called themselves humans. Their planet was called Earth. What do we know about them? Zixtal asked. The intelligence officer pulled up files on the main screen. They are mammals. 2 arms, 2 legs, no fur. They have only been in space for about 100 of their years. No faster than light travel. Their weapons are primitive. They throw metal projectiles using chemical explosives. Zixtal almost laughed. Chemical explosives? The Empire used weapons that could crack planets in half. These humans still used gunpowder like children playing with firecrackers. Population? He asked. About 8 billion on their homeworld, a few thousand in space stations and on their moon. They have small colonies on 2 nearby planets. Fleet strength? None, they have no warships. Just cargo ships and science vessels. This would be the easiest conquest of Zixtal's career. He looked at the tactical display. Earth sat alone in its system like a blue jewel. No defenses, no allies. No hope. The orders were standard. Travel to the target system. Demand surrender. If they refused, demonstrate the Empire's power by destroying a few cities. Then demand surrender again. If they still refused, wipe them out completely. No species had chosen complete destruction in over 800 years. Even the most warlike races saw sense when Imperial ships started melting their cities from orbit. Zixtal's ship, the Void Render, was one of the newer vessels in the Imperial fleet. It was 3 kilometers long and carried enough firepower to sterilize a continent. For this mission, he would have 4 other ships of similar size, more than enough to handle 1 primitive world. The journey to Earth took 12 days at maximum hyperspace speed. When they arrived, Zixtal was surprised by what he saw. The humans had built more than the intelligence report suggested. Their moon was covered with structures. Strange metal frameworks floated between planets. Thousands of small ships moved between different worlds in their system. But none of it mattered. He could see everything the humans had built. It was all so fragile, so small. One blast from his ship's main cannon could destroy their largest space station. Open communications to the planet, Zixtal ordered. The face that appeared on the screen was strange. The human had pale skin and dark hair. Its eyes were small compared to most species. It wore simple clothes with no decorations or rank symbols. It looked weak. I am Commander Zixtal of the Zephyrian Empire, he said, using the standard speech. Your world is now part of the domain of King Vorthak the Eternal. You will surrender unconditionally. You will provide annual tribute of resources and population. You will obey all imperial laws. Any resistance will result in the destruction of your species. The human listened without showing fear. That was unusual. Most species started begging by this point. "I will carry your message to our leaders," the human said. "You will have our answer in 48 hours. The communication ended. Zixtal frowned. 48 hours was longer than most species needed to surrender. Usually they gave up immediately after seeing Imperial ships. "Should we demonstrate our power?" asked Laternkishira. "Destroy one of their space stations?" "Not yet," Zixtal said. "Let them discuss it. They will see reason." But something felt wrong. The human had looked too calm, too confident. Zixtal had seen that look before, but only on species that had some kind of secret weapon or hidden alliance. These humans had neither. 2 days later, the answer came. The same human appeared on the screen. Behind him, Zixtal could see other humans. They all had the same calm expression. "We have considered your offer," the human said. "Our answer is no." Zixtal blinked. "No? We refuse to surrender. We refuse to pay tribute. We refuse to obey your king." The human leaned forward slightly. "If you want our world, come and take it." The communication ended again. For a moment, the bridge was silent. Laternkishira looked shocked. The other officers stared at their screens in disbelief. No one had said no to the Empire in 8 centuries. "Sir?" Laternkishira asked quietly. "What are your orders?" Zixtal looked at the peaceful blue world floating below them. 8 billion humans living their lives, working, playing, loving, dreaming. Soon most of them would be dead. The survivors would spend their lives serving the Empire. It was not his choice. It was how the universe worked. "Signal the fleet," he said. "Begin bombardment of their largest cities. Show them what defiance costs." But as his ships moved into attack position, Zixtal felt something he had never experienced before. The humans knew they could not win. They had seen his ships. They knew what Imperial weapons could do, yet they had still said no. What kind of species chose death over servitude? He was about to find out. The bombardment began at dawn. Zixtal watched from his bridge as energy beams lanced down from his ships. Each beam could melt steel or vaporize rock. The first target was a human city called New York. 8 million people lived there. The beam struck the city center. Zixtal expected to see buildings collapse and fires spread. Instead, the beam hit empty air. The entire city was gone. "Sensors show no human life signs in the target zone," reported his tactical officer. "The city appears to have been evacuated." "Evacuated? When?" "Unknown, sir. Long-range scans show similar patterns across the planet. All major population centers appear to be empty." Zixtal stared at the screens. The humans had emptied their cities. Billions of people had simply vanished. How was that possible? Where could they hide 8 billion beings? "Scan for underground installations," he ordered. The sensors swept across Earth's surface. They found massive tunnel systems beneath every continent. The humans had built an entire civilization underground. They had been preparing for this. How long would it take to build tunnels this extensive? Zixtal asked. His science officer ran calculations. Based on human technology, at least 50 years of constant work. Maybe more, 50 years. These humans had been preparing for the Empire's arrival for half a century. But how did they know to prepare? "Sir," called the communications officer, "we're receiving a transmission from the planet." The same human face appeared on screen. Behind him, Zixtal could see rock walls. They were broadcasting from deep underground. "Nice light show," the human said. "Did you enjoy destroying empty buildings?" "Your people cannot hide forever," Zixtal replied. "Surrender now and I will allow most of them to live." The human smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "We're not hiding, Commander. We're getting ready." "Ready for what?" "For this." The transmission ended. Zixtal looked at his tactical display. Nothing had changed. Earth still hung before them, apparently defenseless. The human space stations were still there, still undefended. Their small ships continued moving between planets as if nothing had happened. Then Laternkishira screamed, "Contact! Multiple contacts! Unknown ships decloaking throughout the system!" The tactical display exploded with red dots. Hundreds of them. Ships were appearing everywhere. Near the planets in the asteroid belt. Even behind Zixtal's own fleet. They had been there all along, invisible to Imperial sensors. "How is this possible?" Zixtal demanded. "We have the best detection systems in the galaxy." "Unknown, sir. The ships appear to be using some form of advanced stealth technology." Advanced? These humans were supposed to be primitive. They were supposed to use chemical rockets and metal bullets. How did they have stealth systems that could fool Imperial sensors? The human ships were strange. They looked like they had been built from scrap metal and spare parts. Many appeared to be converted cargo vessels or mining ships, but they were fast and there were so many of them. Incoming transmission, the communications officer reported. A different human appeared on screen. This one wore what looked like a military uniform. He was older, with gray hair and scars on his face. "Imperial ships," he said. "This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the United Earth Defense Force. You have committed an act of war against our species. We demand that you withdraw immediately." Zixtal almost laughed. "You demand? Look at your screens, Admiral. You have converted cargo ships. We have warships that could destroy planets. Withdraw your vessels or we will destroy them all." Admiral Chen's expression did not change. "You're welcome to try." The transmission ended. For a moment, both fleets hung motionless in space. Then the humans attacked. It was not like any battle Zixtal had ever seen. The humans did not form neat battle lines or try to match the Imperial ships weapon for weapon. Instead, they swarmed. Dozens of small ships attacked each Imperial vessel from different directions. They used the asteroid belt for cover, appearing and disappearing like ghosts, and their weapons were impossible. The first shock came when a converted human mining ship fired at Leotor Kashira's vessel. The projectile punched through the ship's shields as if they did not exist. It was just a lump of metal, but it hit with the force of a small asteroid. "Shields are down," Kashira reported over the communications. "How did a primitive projectile penetrate our barriers?" More human ships appeared, firing strange weapons. Some launched missiles that split apart before impact, turning into clouds of smaller projectiles. Others fired beams of superheated plasma that somehow stayed focused across impossible distances. One ship seemed to be throwing asteroids with magnetic accelerators. But the most disturbing thing was how they fought. The humans did not try to capture Imperial ships. They did not demand surrender. They simply attacked with a fury that Zixtal had never encountered. When their ships were destroyed, the crews did not try to escape. They rammed their damaged vessels into Imperial ships, detonating their reactors on impact. "Sir," his tactical officer shouted. "The Dread Sovereign is gone." Zixtal looked at his display. One of his ships had simply vanished. A moment later, he saw wreckage expanding outward from where it had been. A human ship had somehow gotten inside its shields and exploded. "How many ships have we lost?" he demanded. "7, sir." "No, 8. The humans are using some kind of coordinated attack pattern. They're targeting our engine sections." This was insane. The humans were winning. Primitive humans with converted cargo ships were defeating the Imperial fleet. It should have been impossible. Zixtal's own ship shuddered as something struck the hull. His damage control officer reported breaches on multiple decks. Human boarders had somehow gotten through his shields and armor. "Repel boarders," he ordered. "All security teams to the breach points." But the humans who had boarded his ship were not trying to capture it. They planted explosive charges and left. Zixtal barely had time to evacuate the damaged sections before they exploded. The battle raged for 6 hours. When it was over, only 3 Imperial ships remained. 2 were so badly damaged that they could barely move. Hundreds of human vessels surrounded them. Admiral Chen appeared on the screen again. Her uniform was torn and she had blood on her face, but she was smiling. "Commander Zixtal," she said, "do you wish to surrender?" Zixtal looked at his tactical display. His fleet was destroyed. His ships were crippled. His crew was dead or dying. He had been defeated by a species that should not even have had space travel. "How?" he whispered. "How what?" "How did you do this? Your technology is primitive. Your ships are converted cargo vessels. How did you defeat the Imperial fleet?" Admiral Chen's smile grew wider. "Because we're humans, Commander. And humans don't give up." She was right. That was the difference. Imperial crews fought because they were ordered to fight. They served because they feared punishment. But these humans fought because they chose to fight. They served because they believed in something. And that made all the difference. "You have 10 minutes to evacuate your crews to escape pods," Admiral Chen continued. "After that, we're going to blow up your ships." "Why?" Zixtal asked. "Why not capture them? Our technology is centuries ahead of yours." "Because we don't want your technology, Commander. We want to send a message." "What message?" Admiral Chen looked directly into the camera. Zixtal realized she was not just talking to him. She was talking to everyone who would see this recording. Every species in the Empire would hear her words. "The message is simple," she said. "Tyrants can be beaten. Kings can fall. And humans will teach you how. News traveled faster than Imperial ships. King Vorthak sat on his crystal throne, watching reports flood in from across his empire. On the screen before him, Admiral Creshmore knelt in chains. The admiral had returned with only 2 damaged ships and a crew of broken, terrified survivors. Explain to me again, the king said, his voice like grinding stone, how 50 Imperial warships were destroyed by primitive mammals. Creshmore trembled. Your Majesty, they were not primitive. Their technology was beyond anything we have seen. Their tactics were silence. The king stood. He was tall, even for a Zephyrian. His skin was pale blue, and silver wires could be seen moving beneath it. The creature inside him was hungry. It had not fed properly in days because tribute ships were arriving late or not at all. The humans have given other species ideas. His intelligence minister reported. 17 worlds have delayed their tribute shipments. The Qatari have started work slowdowns in the mining colonies. There are reports of sabotage on Nereid shipping routes. This was what the king feared most. Not human weapons or human ships, but human ideas. The idea that the empire could be resisted. The idea that King Vorthak could be defeated. For 3,000 years, his rule had been based on fear. Species obeyed because they believed resistance was impossible. Now the humans had proven that was not true. Double the tribute demands, the king ordered. Any world that fails to meet its quotas will be destroyed. Sir, that may cause more rebellions. The king's eyes glowed with silver light. Then we will destroy the rebels too. Ready the Grand Armada. I will lead it personally to Earth. When I am finished, there will be nothing left but radioactive dust. The Grand Armada was the largest fleet ever assembled. 300 ships, including the king's personal dreadnought, Eternity's Edge. It was a ship the size of a moon, bristling with weapons that could crack planets apart. But as the Armada traveled toward Earth, more bad news arrived. The Qatari had openly revolted on 6 mining worlds. Nereid cargo ships were ramming Imperial patrols and broadcasting messages of defiance. Even some Zephyrian colonies were questioning their loyalty to the king. And everywhere there were reports of strange ships. Small vessels that appeared and disappeared like ghosts. Human ships, spreading across the galaxy like seeds on the wind. Commander Zixtal, now imprisoned aboard Eternity's Edge, watched the preparations through his cell window. He had been brought along as an example of what happened to failures. But he had seen things during his capture that his people needed to know. The humans were not just random fighters. They had a plan. During his brief time as their prisoner, Zixtal had seen human engineers working alongside Qatari miners and Nereid technicians. They were sharing knowledge, teaching other species how to build weapons, how to organize resistance cells, how to coordinate attacks across multiple star systems. The humans were not trying to conquer the Empire. They were trying to free it. When the Grand Armada arrived at Earth, Zixtal was brought to the bridge to witness the final battle. King Vorthak wanted him to see what happened to those who defied the Empire, but Earth was not the same world Zixtal had left weeks ago. Mars glowed red with the heat of massive industrial complexes. The asteroid belt had been transformed into a maze of weapons platforms and hidden bases. The gas giant Jupiter's moons bristled with railgun installations that could throw projectiles at significant fractions of light speed. And everywhere, there were ships. Not just converted cargo vessels this time, but purpose-built warships. They were still crude by Imperial standards, but there were thousands of them. Impossible, the king whispered. How did they build so much in such a short time? The answer came in a transmission from Earth. Admiral Chen appeared on the screen, but she was not alone. Behind her stood representatives from dozens of species, Qatari, Nereids, and beings that Zixtal did not recognize. King Vorthak, Admiral Chen said. Welcome to Earth. As you can see, we've been busy. Surrender now, the king replied, and I will allow some of your species to survive as slaves. We have a counteroffer, Chen said. You leave our space immediately and we won't blow up your ships, the king laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. You think your primitive weapons can harm the Grand Armada? Eternity's Edge alone has more firepower than your entire system. Maybe, Chen admitted. But we're not alone anymore. As if on cue, new contacts appeared on the tactical display. Ships were decloaking throughout the solar system. But these were not human vessels. Zixtal recognized Qatari hive ships, Nereid deep space cruisers, and the distinctive energy signatures of at least 12 other species. How many species have joined your rebellion? The king demanded. All of them. Chen replied simply. Every species that you've enslaved, King Vorthak. They're all here, and they're all very, very angry. The battle that followed was unlike anything in galactic history. It was not one fleet against another, but dozens of different species fighting together against their common oppressor. Qatari swarm ships overwhelmed Imperial escorts with pure numbers. Nereid vessels used their knowledge of Imperial supply lines to cut off reinforcements. Species that had been enemies for centuries worked together with ruthless efficiency. And through it all, the humans coordinated everything. Their ships were not the most advanced or the most powerful, but they served as the backbone of the alliance. Human tacticians planned the attacks. Human engineers kept alien ships running. Human medics treated wounded beings from dozens of different species. The king's own ship came under assault from every direction. Weapons that he had never seen before struck Eternity's edge's shields. The ship shuddered as alliance forces concentrated their fire on critical systems. Sir, his tactical officer reported, we're losing shields on decks 40 through 60. They're targeting our life support systems. Return fire, the king commanded. Destroy them all. But there were too many targets. For every alliance ship they destroyed, 2 more appeared. And the alliance forces were not trying to capture Imperial vessels. They were systematically destroying the Grand Armada ship by ship. Zixtel watched from his cell as chaos consumed the bridge. Officers ran from station to station, trying to coordinate a defense against enemies attacking from every direction. Through the viewports, he could see Imperial ships burning like dying stars. Then the lights went out. Emergency power kicked in a moment later, bathing everything in red light. The king stood in the center of the bridge, silver wires writhing beneath his skin. The creature inside him was dying, cut off from the tribute system that had fed it for millennia. Sir, the communications officer reported, we're receiving a transmission from the human admiral. Chen appeared on the screen. Behind her, the viewports showed Earth hanging peacefully in space, unmarked by the battle raging around it. Your Majesty, she said, your ship is surrounded. Your fleet is destroyed. Your empire is in rebellion. I'm going to give you one last chance to surrender. The king straightened. Even dying, he was still dangerous. Never. I am King Vorthak the Eternal. I do not surrender to primitives and slaves. Then you'll die like the tyrant you are, Chen replied. But before you do, I want you to know something. This isn't just about Earth. This isn't just about humans. This is about every species you've enslaved. Every world you've conquered, every being whose life you've stolen. She paused, looking directly at the camera. Today, King Vorthak, the galaxy learns that tyrants are not immortal. They can be defeated. They can fall. And when they do, the universe becomes a little bit more free. The transmission ended. Around the bridge, Zixtal could see Imperial officers looking at each other with new expressions. Not fear or loyalty, but something else. Something that looked like hope. For the first time in 3,000 years, the subjects of the Empire were beginning to remember that they outnumbered their king. The Second Battle of Sol lasted 3 weeks. King Vorthak had brought the most powerful fleet in galactic history to destroy one small world. Instead, he found himself trapped in a grinding war of attrition that consumed ships and lives like a hungry beast. The humans and their allies did not fight like any enemy the Empire had faced. They did not try to win quick victories or capture territory. They simply ground the Imperial fleet down piece by piece, day by day. Commander Zixtal watched it all from his prison cell. Through the small window, he could see the space around Earth filled with wreckage. Imperial ships floated dead in the void, their hulls torn open by weapons that should not have existed. But for every Imperial ship destroyed, the Alliance seemed to have 2 more vessels ready to take its place. The king was dying. The silver creature inside him grew weaker each day as tribute from across the Empire stopped flowing. Worlds that had sent their life energy to feed the parasite for centuries now kept it for themselves. Without that constant nourishment, both the king and his symbiont were beginning to fail. Status report, Vorthak demanded from his throne. His voice was weaker than it had been days before. We have lost 70% of the fleet, his tactical officer reported. The remaining ships are low on ammunition and fuel. Life support is failing on multiple vessels. And the enemy? They continue to receive reinforcements. Long-range sensors show more ships arriving daily from across the galaxy. Species we have never seen before are joining the Alliance. This was the king's worst nightmare coming true. The rebellion was spreading faster than his ships could travel. Every day brought news of new worlds declaring independence, new species joining the alliance, new imperial governors being overthrown by their own subjects. But Vorthak still had one final weapon. Deep in the heart of Eternity's Edge sat a device that no other species possessed. The core destabilizer could trigger chain reactions in nearby stars, causing them to explode in supernovas. If he could not rule the galaxy, he would deny it to everyone else. "Prepare the destabilizer," he ordered. His science officer looked shocked. "Sir, that weapon has never been tested. We don't know if we can control the reaction once it starts." "I don't care. If these primitives want to destroy my empire, I'll destroy their entire system." But preparing the weapon would take time. And time was something the king no longer had. The alliance forces had learned to work together with frightening efficiency. Human tactical coordinators directed Qatari swarm attacks while Nereid engineers kept everyone's ships running. Species that had been enemies for millennia now shared resources and knowledge freely. Zixtal had seen some of these alien-human partnerships during his brief captivity. A human medic treating wounded Qatari warriors, a Nereid engineer showing humans how to improve their shield systems, beings from different worlds working together because they shared a common goal. It was something the Empire had never understood. Fear could make people obey, but it could not make them truly cooperate. Love, hope, and shared purpose created bonds that no weapon could break. The breakthrough came when a group of human engineers, working with captured Qatari miners, figured out how to disable Imperial shields from the inside. They had studied the wreckage of destroyed Imperial ships and found a weakness in the shield generators. Suddenly, Alliance forces could penetrate Imperial defenses at will. Ships that had seemed invincible became vulnerable. The remaining Imperial fleet found itself helpless against enemies that could strike anywhere. "Sir," the communications officer reported, "we're being hailed by multiple Imperial ships. They're requesting permission to surrender." King Vorthak stood from his throne. The movement was painful. Silver wires writhed beneath his skin like dying serpents. "No one surrenders. Any ship that tries to give up will be destroyed by my personal guard." But even the king's most loyal troops were beginning to question their orders. They had watched their friends die in a hopeless battle. They had seen their empire crumbling around them. Some had even received secret messages from family members on Imperial worlds, telling them about the rebellions spreading across the galaxy. Zixtal could see the doubt in their eyes. The absolute certainty that had made the Imperial military so effective was cracking. Soldiers were starting to think for themselves instead of blindly following orders. The final crisis came, when a human boarding party reached Eternity's Edge. They had somehow gotten through the ship's defenses and were fighting their way toward the bridge. But these humans were not alone. With them came Zephyrian crew members who had joined the rebellion. "How is this possible?" the king demanded. "Why are my own people fighting against me?" Zixtal knew the answer. He had learned it during his time as a human prisoner. The humans had not tried to convert Imperial troops through torture or brainwashing. Instead, they had shown them something the Empire never had: kindness. When Zixtal's ship had been captured, the humans had treated his wounded crew members. They had shared food with hungry prisoners. They had spoken to Imperial soldiers not as enemies, but as fellow beings who deserved basic respect. Many Imperial troops had never experienced that kind of treatment from their own officers. The rebellion aboard Eternity's Edge was led by Captain Vexishari, one of the king's own guards. She had served the Empire for 40 years. She had killed rebels and crushed uprisings without question, but something had changed during the battle. "I watched humans die to save my crew," she announced to the other guards, not because they were ordered to, not because they feared punishment, but because they believed it was right. "They are the enemy," another guard protested. "No," Vexishari replied. "The enemy is the being who has enslaved us all for 3,000 years. The enemy is the one who treats us like property instead of people." The mutiny spread quickly through the ship. Officers who had served the king faithfully turned against him when they realized they had a choice. Crew members who had never questioned orders suddenly remembered they were not machines. King Vorthak found himself barricaded in his throne room with only a handful of loyal followers. Outside, he could hear fighting as rebels and loyalists battled for control of the ship. "Activate the destabilizer," he ordered his remaining science officer. "If I cannot have this galaxy, no one will." But as the officer reached for the controls, the throne room doors exploded inward. Human soldiers poured through, followed by Zephyrian rebels and beings from a dozen other species. At their head walked Admiral Chen and Captain Vexisheri, side by side. "Hello, Your Majesty," Admiral Chen said. "It's over." King Vorthak looked around the room. His guards had laid down their weapons. His officers were backing away from him. Even his science officer had stepped back from the destabilizer controls. For the first time in 3 millennia, King Vorthak was alone. "How?" he whispered. "How did mere humans do this?" Admiral Chen walked closer. She was not afraid of him anymore. None of them were. "We didn't do this alone," she said. "We just reminded everyone else that they had a choice." The silver creature inside the king gave a final spasm and went still. Without its support, Vorthak collapsed to the floor. The being who had ruled a galaxy for 3,000 years died not in glorious battle, but as a broken old man abandoned by his own subjects. Captain Vexisheri knelt beside his body. "What do we do now?" she asked. Admiral Chen looked around the throne room at the representatives of dozens of species, all waiting for her answer. But she shook her head. "This isn't up to me," she said. "It's up to all of us. For the first time in 3,000 years, the galaxy is free. What we do with that freedom is our choice." Through the viewports of the throne room, they could see Earth hanging in space, blue and green and beautiful. The world that had started a revolution simply by refusing to surrender. The revolution was complete. Now the real work could begin. 5 years after the king's death, Commander Zixtal stood in a place he never thought he would see again. The crystal throne room of King Vorthak had been transformed into something else. The walls that once displayed the Empire's conquests now showed star charts marking free worlds. The throne itself had been removed, replaced by a simple circular table where representatives from different species could meet as equals. Zixtal was one of those representatives now. The Zephyrian coalition had elected him to speak for the scattered remnants of the old imperial military. Many of his former colleagues had struggled to adapt to a galaxy where orders came from elected councils instead of absolute rulers. "The memorial construction is proceeding on schedule," reported Director Tyranny, a Qatari engineer whose ancestors had built monuments in the mines of Kepler 442. "We should be ready for the dedication ceremony next month." Admiral Chen, now Director General of the United Galactic Alliance, nodded. Her hair had more gray than it used to, but her eyes still held the same determination that had faced down King Vorthak. "What about the inscription?" "We've received suggestions from over 200 species," Tyranny replied. "But the most popular choice seems to be the one proposed by the human delegation." She activated a holographic display. Words appeared in the air, written in dozens of different languages and scripts. But the meaning was the same in all of them. "Here lie the victims of tyranny. Here begins the age of freedom." Zixtal read the words slowly. Some of the languages belonged to species he had helped conquer during his years serving the Empire. Others came from worlds that had joined the Alliance after the king's death. All of them had found their voice at last. "There's been another development," Chen said quietly. "The Outer Rim explorers have made contact with a new species. They call themselves the Hegemony. They have an empire stretching across 40 star systems." The room fell silent. Everyone knew what that meant. Another tyrant. Another empire built on the suffering of enslaved worlds. Another war, perhaps. "What do we know about them?" asked Captain Vexisheri. The former Imperial Guard now commanded the Alliance's rapid response fleet. "They follow the old pattern," Chen replied. "One dominant species ruling over dozens of client races. Heavy tribute demands. Brutal suppression of dissent. They've already demanded that the Outer Rim colonies submit to their authority." "And the colony's response?" Chen smiled. It was the same expression she had worn when facing King Vorthak's ultimatum. "They told the Hegemony to come and take it." Around the table, representatives from dozens of species began to speak at once. Some argued for military intervention. Others suggested diplomatic contact. A few wanted to wait and see how the situation developed. But Zixtal found himself thinking about something else entirely. 5 years ago, Earth had stood alone against the most powerful empire in the galaxy. The humans had no allies, no advanced weapons, no realistic hope of victory. They had won anyway. Not through superior technology, but through an idea. The idea that freedom was worth fighting for. "What are you thinking?" Chen asked him quietly. I'm thinking about how things spread, Zixtal replied. The rebellion against King Vorthak didn't start with massive fleets or grand strategies. It started with individual beings making individual choices. A Qatari miner who refused to work, a Nereid captain who turned her ship around, a Zephyrian guard who decided she had served a tyrant long enough. And now that idea is spreading beyond our alliance. The Outer Rim colonies learned about freedom by watching what happened to the Empire. Species we've never met are discovering that they don't have to live in chains. Chen nodded slowly. The hegemony won't be expecting that. They'll think they're facing another primitive species that can be easily conquered. Just like King Vorthak thought about humans. The discussion around the table continued for hours. Military experts analyzed the hegemony's fleet strength. Diplomats debated the best way to approach subject species within their territory. Economists calculated the cost of supporting another liberation war. But Zixtal knew the real decision had already been made. It had been made the moment Admiral Chen received the report about enslaved worlds crying out for freedom. The alliance would help, not because they were ordered to, but because it was right. 3 months later, Zixtal stood on the bridge of a human ship watching history repeat itself. The hegemony fleet had arrived at the Outer Rim colonies expecting an easy conquest. Instead, they found themselves facing an alliance of free peoples who refused to surrender. But this time it was different. The alliance forces were not desperate defenders fighting for their homes. They were liberators carrying a message to enslaved worlds throughout hegemony space. The message was simple. You are not alone. The battle was shorter than the one at Earth. The hegemony had never faced coordinated resistance from their subject species before. When Qatari saboteurs disabled their supply lines and Nereid infiltrators knocked out their communications, the hegemony commanders found themselves fighting blind against enemies who seemed to know their every move. More importantly, word of the battle spread throughout hegemony space faster than their ships could travel. Species that had served as slaves for generations began to remember what freedom looked like. The hegemony's capital world fell not to invasion, but to internal revolution. The ruling council was overthrown by their own subjects, who had learned from captured alliance broadcasts how to organize effective resistance. Another empire falls, Vexishari observed as they watched the hegemony's surrender ceremony. How many more are out there? Does it matter? Chen replied. However many there are, they all have the same weakness. Which is? They're built on the lie that some beings deserve to rule while others deserve to serve. Once people stop believing that lie, empires become just collections of free worlds waiting to remember their liberty. Zixtal thought about his own journey from Imperial commander to Alliance representative. The change had not been easy. He had spent 60 years following orders without question. Learning to think for himself had been the hardest thing he had ever done, but it had also been the most important. What's our next mission? He asked. Chen looked at the star charts displaying the known galaxy. Red dots marked tyrannical empires. Yellow showed unstable regions where freedom and oppression battled for control. Green indicated free worlds allied with Earth and its partners. There was still more red than green. Our next mission is the same as it's always been, Chen said. We find beings who are ready to be free and we show them how. 10 years later, Zixtal attended the dedication of another memorial. This one stood on the former capital world of the hegemony, honoring the species who had died during their rebellion. The inscription was the same as the one on King Vorthak's world. Here lie the victims of tyranny. Here begins the age of freedom. But underneath, someone had added another line in simple human script. Tyrants fear the day when their subjects remember they are people. Standing in the crowd of free beings from hundreds of different worlds, Zixtal realized that the age of empires was ending. Not because they were being conquered by superior force, but because they were being replaced by something better. The galaxy was learning that freedom was not something granted by rulers to subjects. It was something that belonged to every thinking being, simply because they existed. And once that lesson was learned, it could never be unlearned. Across the galaxy, on worlds he would never see, beings were making the same choice his own people had made. They were choosing freedom over servitude, hope over fear, cooperation over domination. They were choosing to be human in the way that mattered most, not in biology or appearance, but in spirit, in the absolute refusal to accept that oppression was inevitable. The memorial ceremony ended with a moment of silence for those who had died fighting for liberty. Then the crowd dispersed, representatives returning to their ships and their worlds and their ongoing work of building a better galaxy. But the idea they carried with them would never die. It would spread from system to system, world to world, person to person, until every thinking being in the universe knew a simple truth. Tyrants rule only as long as people believe they must be obeyed, and humans had taught the galaxy to stop believing.